because it was one of our time in cabinet babies. But I think there's two things which could be helpful to look into, potentially not for this plan, which I realise has gone up for consultation already, but in the future that was in the health and wellbeing plan that is not as heavily referenced within the new one. And one of those is loneliness and its impact on health determinants. And the other one is breastfeeding initiation. We know that breastfeeding initiation in Swale is really low. Breastfeeding continuance is also really low. There's a real lack of support for families that choose to breastfeed children, and we know that from the Marmot review that it's an incredibly impactful way of reducing poor health determinants in the future. So it's something that I think we should put in to a piece of work looking forward. Thank you.
Councillor Worcester as a visiting member.
Good evening, Chair. I think I'm actually, sorry, late notice subbing for Councillor Ashley Shell this evening. I only found out that today. Sorry about that. I'm also apologies because I'm very poorly, so I'm not sitting away from my group out of fun. I'm trying to make sure I don't pass on my children's whatever it is. So I just wanted to, I only have one question regarding the report because I think it's excellent. But when you're talking about free school meals, that's a bit of an odd issue. When you look at schools data, it's actually not deemed as free school meals anymore. It's actually deemed as pupil premium support. And I think that needs to be recognised because pupil premium support is only actually recognised through those families that do attend mainstream schooling. It doesn't really recognise those children who are homeschooled and their particular situation. And also the disparity in the, what Councillor Gibson was talking about, may occur because obviously coastal schools, especially in deprived areas, will see a marked increase in pupil premium support, and that data for any member that's interested is available on all schools' websites if you'd like to check your local primary or secondary. It's part of the national legal data that they should be providing for everybody. So that might be quite an interesting thing to kind of explore at a later date as to those nuances around those families that are able to access that support, which goes on household income for KCC. And also the other thing to recognise is that most schools and boards of governors realise that actually they may recognise a amount of children that fall into that, and that is usually accepted to be 10% lower in each school through things like people having social issues with claiming that support. But if we can all encourage families to claim that support, it not only supports the family with, for example, free school meals, it also supports the school in being able to access extra funding to support children on a targeted approach and on a whole school basis support, which is just for general information. Thank you, Chair. Again, apologies for my lateness.
No problem, thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. Did you want to, have you got any answers summed up?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's some data check to be done in those areas, so we'll take that away and follow those up. Appreciate the comments and the support. Just touching on the loneliness, we've got a piece of work that we're specifically looking at around that. But no, I think the breastfeeding is definitely that where we can look at that, and as well as Councillor Worcester's comments around the premium support. Yeah, and the change of name, I take that comment, Councillor Worcester. Thank you.
If we can squeeze that data in before it gets to PNR, that'd be great. Okay, so the recommendation is the committee is asked to approve the Empowering You in Swale strategy for onward adoption by the Policies and Resources Committee. Do I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Carnell proposed it, Councillor Worcester seconded it. All those in favour, please show. That is unanimous, thank you. So we'll move on to item 6, which is the Household Support Fund Prioritisation Framework. And it's over to you again, Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Chair. The Household Support Fund report brings you an update of the current position. It gives you the current on the 1st of September 24, that date is wrong on there, until the 31st of March 25. And we are currently nearly at the end of that spend, so that programme will end shortly. We have, throughout the last sort of 4 or 5 rounds, delivered the same or a similar delivery model, and that's been working with our VCSE organisations in Swale. We fund 90% of the pot out to the VCSE in Swale, and they deliver on our behalf. They do an absolutely tremendous job in ensuring that those in our community who need that support can access it. So we thank them very much for that work. Within the report, I have listed the current spend allocation. So the majority of the spend does go into food and energy services. They support households who obviously need that vital to support to feed their families and heat their homes. In the report, I've given you details of the One Swale roadshows. These are our multi-agency drop-in sessions that are being delivered around the borough. They are quite well established now, and they have become a quite a good source of support access for residents. Within the data set, that gives you the numbers of households that we've supported throughout the entire scheme. The proposals tonight are on the back of conversations that we've had with the cost of living group, which is a multi-service group. It's very well attended from across statutory, non-statutory organisations. We meet bi-monthly to discuss the issue of cost of living, and we assess the data, and we look at the issues being affected by our residents in the borough. The proposals within the scheme are to review slightly the service delivery for round 7. So round 7 will be April 25 for a year through to March 26. We don't know what the funding allocation is, and we haven't seen the guidance criteria as yet. So it is all reliant on the amount of money we get and obviously the guidance that comes through from that. But we would like to include some more work around prevention and maybe take some of the alignment of funding into that area to increase the service delivery we do around that, as potentially we don't know what will happen past March 26. So the proposal tonight is to take a steer from members as to allocation of household support funding round 7. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any members have questions or comments? I've got Councillor Worcester, then Nundy, then Gibson, then Perkin.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I was due to be coming over to this meeting this evening anyway. I just wanted to thank the Chair for allowing me to have, as a visiting ward member, to have a comment on this item. But as I'm part of the committee this evening, that seems a bit irrelevant. I wanted to thank SJ and her team for allowing so many conversations around seashells with regards to household support funding, because even though this doesn't have what you might call a direct input, it is a massive issue for seashells, because that's how the fuel and food funding advisor works on SHEPI. The vouchers have been given out via CAB and the fuel advisor, and obviously with the potentially removal of funding from KCC, what we could be seeing here is unfortunately that post disappearing. And what I was coming here this evening to beg the committee is, in its consideration when it's looking at the way that the household support funding works, is to consider before looking at that post, is that is really a massive post for Sheppey. I know it's supposed to work for the whole as well, but I can only relate back to what's going on Sheppey, really, for my ward, in that when those vouchers are offered to families, it is not just the vouchers. That member of staff gives out numerous and attracts numerous resources for those families that are not just vouchers. They are blankets, they are ways to, for instance, stop condensation and things above my pay grade for this skill level of how to support families through fuel poverty. And without the support from the household funding and other revenue areas that we are in conversation with, it may well mean that not only do we lose the way of giving out those vouchers to people on Sheppey, we also lose the whole professional input that advisor gives to that community in terms of its trust, in terms of those networking links that have already been made by that person. And that is invaluable when you're talking about families that have difficulty coming forward anyway to people like the council, to people that wear a lanyard, who wear a uniform. It is incredibly difficult to make that jump, and this allocation needs to be seen in that light, not just of a budget line, but actually what social support is offered by the person that has hundreds of community hours in networking and supporting those individual families. I'm aware that we don't want to provide a crutch. We can't have people consistently using that support all the time, but it has to be really a delicate balance between what is provided by this council and what is not. And we already recognise as a community that Swale goes above and beyond its support in this area, like with the additional meeting held by SJ's department for cost of living. We very much appreciate that. But the areas that are affected have already lost their community wardens who would have provided some of this support. Really, that advisor is the last place that people will go to find this support. And if they're not going to that advisor, our data will be affected. We may still have the issues in our community, but they're not being registered because those families will just simply not come forward. And that, to me, is the biggest tragedy, that not only do we have the poverty in our area that is being affected, that we cannot find a way to recognise that in data because we don't have the right professional on the ground to make those links for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lundy next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the data around the amount of footfall at the one-stop roadshows, the highest one there was at Seashells. So we've got a KCC councillor in the room. I think maybe that might be an idea to bring that up when that goes back to full council. In terms of the proposals, it says food banks are seeing vast numbers of complex cases and the fuel support services are still overrun with applications for vouchers. But then one of the proposals is to continue doing the energy and water MasterCards, but at a reduced service. So if it's higher than it was, say, last year, why are we running that at a reduced service?
Shall I do Councillor Worcester's? First? Councillor Worcester, I know that we've obviously had conversations about this, and we are working really closely with children and families to look at how the fuel and water advisor can be funded. We have only ever part funded that role from Household Support Fund. It's never been fully funded. So, but I am aware that there are other energy providers that they're looking to source funding from. So we are working really, really closely with them. It's a really important service. I acknowledge that we can do all we can with that.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back quickly on that? I apologise that I didn't make that clear. We have had those conversations, absolutely. And like I say, we do absolutely appreciate that the Swale goes above and beyond because they don't have to allocate that funding. It's a choice, isn't it, for allocation of funding. I will just say, to clarify the point, that when we talk about the removal of the KCC funding, it's that person needs a desk to operate from. They need lights to be able to switch on. They actually need a pencil to use and a pen to use. So when we're looking around, it is a holistic approach to funding that centre. And we know that, for example, we have very little resources to be able to offer that space for even that person to operate. So it really is a ballpark push, and lots of people in the community, for example, towns and parishes, are more than welcome to have that conversation about how we can best go forward to make sure that we are not just resting that burden just on Swale. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lister. Councillor Nundu, in response to your comment, oh yes, sorry. So the different vouchers. So the £100 MasterCard voucher is for build fuel accounts. So that is a payment that can be used to pay build accounts. That is quite an expensive service that we deliver through the Household Support Fund. They're £100 cards, and they are utilised, so that data shows that they are spent every single round, whereas the fuel vouchers that are issued through the Fuel and Water Advisor and the Systems Advice Service, those are the pre-card meter payments. So it would be about the making a choice of where you members feel that finance should be sitting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I think an excellent report and makes clear the kind of real challenges we're facing. My question was around linking back to some of the data in the previous report, really, about how we're both working with partners and encouraging our partners to reach into those bottom two deciles, particularly noting that there are several references to very worthy projects on Sheppey and Sittingbourne, and relatively limited references beyond the West Faversham Community Centre to Faversham, when several of those neighbourhoods were in Faversham as well. So just some kind of extra clarity around that and how we're doing that partnership working would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Perkin.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask for some expansion on partnership working as well. I think that there's been some really positive partnership working. It's very clear, like throughout the report, that there's been a real step forward in partnership working, I think. So I think the team should be really pleased with that as a development. I just wanted to kind of make a few points about the report more generally. I'm very supportive of the idea of moving towards a more preventative kind of priority-based look at this kind of work. I'm a trustee of the Faversham Food Bank, and I know within the report it says that the main reason that people end up in these kind of situations is because of sudden change and because of health conditions that are worsening. Quite often, we hear about people having to budget more effectively or be more careful with their money, but actually these families are people that just don't have any more cloth to cut. There's nothing else they can do. They can't find money out of anywhere. Going to the shop is becoming increasingly ridiculous. The prices of energy are set to go up again in April, and I just don't understand how people are coping. I really don't. I think we've become desensitised to the term cost of living, which in itself is a super bleak term. Like, the cost of living is awful. And I think it's also really difficult to build community resilience when we have this year on year, are we going to get household support funding or are we not going to get household support funding? Because if you are to start looking into prevention, that is a more holistic, long-term looking piece of work than doing the kind of sticking plaster stuff, which is also really important, and responding to those kind of issues in the moment. So if somebody is not able to provide food for their family, they have a food bank to go to. If they're not able to put the lights on at home, they have a fuel worker to go to. But when you start looking at preventative work, that is more long-term building of resilience, and it's difficult to do that when you are being promised a year-on-year settlement and not knowing, whether you're going to receive that or not, or whether there's going to be spending restrictions on what you can do with that funding. So I was going to propose that as a committee, we write to the government to just ask for some, well, primarily to ask for a multi-year settlement of household support fund so that we can start looking more in depth into those preventative strategies, but also for some reassurance that this is not going to be pulled away from local authority throughout the devolution process. I think that would be a really helpful thing for us to understand, and if we could, through you, Chair, if I could propose that as an action for the committee, then I would do that.
I think that's acceptable. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Gibson. Any comments on the proposal? No, I'll come back to you once we've done the proposal. All those in favour, please show. That also is unanimous. Back to the substantive item. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, it's really obviously an important service, the Household Support Fund. Obviously, a lot of sort of all the organisations and places are Sheerness sort of town centre based. I think it's worth noting that obviously we don't have many places for advice, and people are expected to travel to like Seychelles or somewhere for advice at the eastern end of the island. I know that they do the roadshow at the Eastern Sheppey Community Hub, but sort of when that's not there, there isn't many places. So maybe sort of putting some information about for more at the eastern end of the island. Thank you.
Any other councillors? No? Back to you then, Sarah Jane.
Thank you. I'll just come back to the comments regarding the Faversham Partnership, the work, and note that actually there should be more in there about the work we do with West Fav, because actually it's crucial. They deliver support to young people and we feed families through the centre, so take that to be included. And the partnership working development has really been through the Household Support Fund that we've been able to create the cost of living group and actually really understand what is actually going on the ground. So that really helps. And take the point about the eastern end of the island. We have been doing some work with Citizens Advice around the caravan sites. We've also been doing some work around expanding the one swell over there. But yeah, we'll definitely look at improving that service there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have a proposer and seconder for the steer we provided? Councillor Gibson, Councillor Winkless. Thank you. All those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you. So we now move on to item 7, which is the overnight vehicle. Let me check. It's the overnight vehicle issues at locations across Sheppey. As you'll see, we've got several recommendations. I think Martin's introducing this one.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, councillors. It's as you can see, it's quite a detailed report with a number of recommendations. So I will just go through the key pertinent points this evening on this one. So it's a follow-up report to the one you saw in December. That report laid out the issues being reported by councillors and residents caused by overnight stays on certain locations. It highlighted, however, that the community was split on this. So some support the vehicle staying overnight for free in those locations, and you saw a petition with 480 odd signatures on it in relation to that, whilst others obviously wanted to see the problems resolved. So the December report gave a number of suggested options which members considered and then agreed to go out to public consultation on. You'll see from the appendix, we had a fantastic response to the public consultation, over 1,200 responses, which shows the interest in the matter. The report and the appendix give a full breakdown of that, but broadly speaking, the headlines from that are a support to put overnight charges in at the locations mentioned. Barton's Point is considered within the report, so we suggest in the report that the areas of green opposite the shingle bank are also included within the off-street parking order on the basis that otherwise displacement would be seen over to those green areas. But it talks about some complexities in relation to the Barton's Point car park. The officer view is that we really don't want to encourage overnight stays within that car park. We are currently conducting ecology surveys in and around the coastal park to help inform what the future operation of the coastal park will look like, and we believe taking that decision now could potentially impact that operation. However, we absolutely understand that before we initiate the charges, we would need to come up with a solution to how to protect that car park. So we're not proposing that tonight, but we understand we need to do more work on that. The report also includes a couple of appendices, which is the consultation we did with the parish and town councils, town and parish councils. So we've got something from Laysdown on Shell Ness, and we've got something from Minster on the Shingle Bank. There's a number of things that you as a committee need to discuss tonight, and the officers have sort of laid those out without any strong recommendations on those, because the consultation was fairly split, so times of charging, the amount to be charged, and obviously the type of vehicle that it would apply to. The officer recommendation on type of vehicle, however, is quite a clear one, and that is that it should relate to all vehicles that are parked in that area. Otherwise, enforcement becomes very, very difficult to keep consistent, and would end up in a fair amount of challenges. So we can't enter vehicles to prove or disprove certain things. So it's a fairly strong recommendation from us that it's, if we implement the charges, then it is for all vehicles. However, we can include a complete ban on caravans as part of the order. If we get the wording right in the order. There are some one-off costs. Unfortunately, we talk about enforcement, and that requires resource, that requires equipment to be able to do. So you'll see some one-off costs to consider for year one. The enforcement costs in there are obviously the big chunk. That is buying additional hours from our enforcement operator to be able to adequately enforce against the restrictions. That can shrink depending upon the impact of that enforcement. So often you spend a lot of enforcement to start with, that changes behaviour, it then tends to settle, and you can start to think about reducing. So that is a worst case for an annual cost, but it may be able to be shrunk over time. The only thing I would say is on the recommendations then is in item 6. We also suggest that because of the displacement issue, that we look to put some protection markings, yellow lines on the road areas in and around these areas. Of course, for those of you on Joint Transportation Board, you know that's not a quick process. And so therefore, whilst we can do an off-street order fairly quickly, on-street is a lot more difficult. And so it actually reads as a requirement to add traffic restrictions. I guess if we want to act pretty quickly for the summer, we might want to just water down the word requirement to propose or consider request. So that's all I'll say. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Whiting has indicated he wishes to speak as a visiting member.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Yeah, I think parking on the Shingle Bank has been, for a long time, one of the top issues for the Sheffield residents who write to me on a regular basis, and generally they have two questions. How was it allowed to get so bad, and when will it be sorted? And I have some sympathy with both of those. The Shingle Bank has had a no overnight parking sign for some time, yet it's not been properly enforced, and the issue has been discussed by this council for some time also, yet only now are we seeing some real action. That said, Mr Chairman, belated action is better than no action, so I fully support the officers' recommendations on page 45. I'm pleased officers have listened to the residents in their assessment of the consultation and that the clear message regarding overnight parking has been heard. And I would urge your members of the committee to approve recommendation 1 to charge for overnight parking. Clearly, we do need some income to pay for the enforcement and of the upkeep. Personally, I think a charge of about £15 a night from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Would be reasonable. It's lower than some of the neighbouring authorities charge, but wouldn't significantly undercut any commercial parks on the island. And I don't think it's necessary to charge during the day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, as we want to keep enforcement costs low and to encourage day trippers to visit, as has been the case, say, with windsurfers, for example, for many years. I think the overnight charge should apply to all vehicles, as Martin has suggested, and there should be a complete ban on caravans. We're starting from scratch. I would suggest also, Mr Chairman, your committee might like to make all of this subject to an annual review to ensure that it's working as best it can. And I think now we've got some momentum. It's really important that we have the new charges in place before the summer holidays start. Well, I think we need to reassure the public that we've listened to them and are getting on with it. And I would suggest that the committee sets the officers a deadline of the 1st of July to have all of this in place. And I noticed Martin frowning. But we've got to start somewhere, Mr Chairman. And I think that gives everyone fair warning and time to set up the necessary systems. Under recommendation 6, I agree with Martin. I think require is a bit difficult, and recommendations really on those issues for JTB and Swales Cabinet. It will take far too long. You'll never get the thing through in time for summer. Just to change that one word would make it so much easier. So just in closing, Mr Chairman, I would urge the committee to support the officers and those who've spoken out against uncontrolled overnight parking, and to instruct, with the caveats I've just mentioned, to try to get a charging system in place by the 1st of July. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whiting. Also, visiting member Councillor Palmer has just indicated to speak.
Yep, thank you, Chair. And thanks to the officers for the in-depth report. And I agree with the outcome of the report in general. I just wondered if it was possible at Barton's Point to put the traffic regulation order in, but you don't have to start enforcing it until such time and it's all ready to go. And you can do all at the same time. And that might save time going down the road. And I agree with what Councillor Whiting said. I think £15 is a reasonable charge for such a thing. You can actually tell if a vehicle is constructed. So if the traffic order said a vehicle constructed with a toilet, with an internal toilet, you can tell from the outside that it's got an internal toilet. However, that's in the gift of the committee, but all vehicles, but I agree with Councillor Whiting, it should only be during the night. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up from the committee, Councillor Worcester.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to firstly, it's the wrong words, but give thanks to obviously the previous chair of the Community Committee, who has been out on the road, area committees and things like that, presenting this consultation, and Swale for obviously including more people from that area committee feedback, which I think was essential in making sure, because obviously it's not just the wards affected that are going to be benefiting from work that's done here. I was going to be a visiting member, so I'll start with those comments if that's okay, but I do have some questions around the report as a committee member, oddly. So Sheerness did not put in a response even though we were asked to, because I wanted to come here and talk about the flip side of the conversation, which is that I visited the Shingle Bank as part of the consultation work, and I went with paper copies and to talk to people that were actually residing in that area. I didn't get down to Laysdown, which was not my aim. I wanted to go to both areas, but it has to be said that I do feel that even though it doesn't cover this, that committee members do have a responsibility to be thinking about the housing conversation that also exists around here. The report does talk about displacement of people, and I think that has happened a lot on Sheppey. So we have shut down the use of Cromwell Road, quite rightly. We have made some changes in the ship on shore, and my real concern, and I was pleased to see both areas coming through, that if the two areas were treated differently, that we could have seen displacement down to Laysdown, and that would have meant that those people would have had far less access to services than they have at the moment on the Shingle Bank because of the location and the fact that lots of those people do not drive, even though they are in caravans. And I think it has to be a consideration that a joint piece of work needs to be had with regards to displacement of people and their welfare and how we are dealing with that, and that those two bits of the conversation are intrinsically linked and cannot be ignored. And I would like to thank residents, including the ones that have put up the petition, say actually we'd like to leave it alone, because there could have been the opportunity for that voice to not be heard at all. I think it has been heard, and we are going on data, which is the right thing to do, but I would urge people to consider the flip side of the housing conversation that needs to be had. Otherwise, we could be accused as a council of, I'm going to use the word gentrification, and pushing people out of their own area just because they simply cannot afford or have no access to housing support. And that, for me, is a bigger question that needs to be looked at by the council on a number of levels. The questions that I had with regards to the costings of this, the general repairs to the surfacing of the Shingle Bank, which is billed at £5,000, I think a bigger question and conversation needs to be around the upkeep of that area, because historically that has sat with the Environment Agency, and I don't think that we should be bearing those costs ourselves as a council. I think that's a joint conversation that needs to be had. And I'd also like to see the removal of concrete blocks removed from the possibility, because we have had, for instance, coaches go up on that coastal bank, which is entirely inappropriate and absolutely dangerous, in my opinion. And removal of those concrete blocks may lead to inappropriate vehicles using that on a basis that just isn't safe, because it's a shingle sea defence, not a car parking multi-storey area that can put up with as much weight as we can put on it. My concern as well is around item in the report 2.22, which concerns Barton's Point. I was hoping that we'd be looking at a green flag award for that coastal park in the future, and I absolutely disagree with the fact that we need to charge that area in any way, shape or form, and I don't think the two items should be linked at this time anyway. With regards to towns and parishes having an input, I think it's really important that we realise that yes, the Environment Agency is nationally paid for their budget, but for things like the waste that's taken away and very immediate issues that are at the Shingle Bank that have been highlighted by residents on numbers and numbers and numbers of occasions do come out of this council's budget. So I'm pleased to see that the costings are there. I'm pleased to see that the recommendations are there. But as long as we're looking at that welfare conversation at the same time, then I will be supporting the recommendations in this report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we look forward to updates on the green flag at your committee. Next up, Councillor No.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, there is a lot has been said about Shingle Bank. We're being asked here to approve overnight charges, just straight out, without not a lot of information on how Shellnest is going to be managed here. It's almost a footnote. There is a mention of difficulties on how they're going to do CCTV. The poles don't even have power to them. There's very little else said about it. Now, Laysdown Parish Council produced a pretty detailed report about the feelings of our residents, and it was split around the middle. And the reason being is because there are a lot of issues going on down there. Now, there's really nothing in here to say how that's going to be mitigated, aside from mentioning we might be able to put up CCTV if the KCC will give power to the posts. I'm finding it very difficult to be able to say, yes, go ahead and introduce overnight charges without saying how it's going to be managed, how it's going to be enforced, and how the issues are going to be mitigated. So yes, we've talked a lot about Shingle Bank. They said a lot of things about how that's going to be managed. Yes, go ahead with it. But can we get a bit more information on Shell Nest before we just go ahead and say, sure, throw in some parking charges? Thank you.
Next up, Councillor Nundy.
Councillor Perkin did definitely put her hand up before me.
Okay, I've got a long list. Councillor Neal next then.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry. With view to the Barton's Point, have we had any consultation with the people that run it at the moment, how they feel about whether they want that charging in their caravan or in their car park? And with regards to the parking restrictions along Marine Parade, like Marine Parade is a very long road. How far are we talking? Are we talking down to the ship on shore? Or how far is that proposing for the restrictions to go along there? And I think that the restrictions on the Shingle Bank should go from 8 until 8. And I think, as been already been mentioned, I think 15 quid is fairly reasonable. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Perkin.
Thank you. So I've been told quite a lot to keep my nose out of parking on Sheppey. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay. So the first question is, you said about, we know that like putting double yellow lines through the JTB takes like 25 million years. So how is there any potential for that to become dangerous? So is there displacement without yellow lines? Would that cause accessibility problems for like emergency vehicles or anything like that? And then the second one, and I appreciate this is probably a question for P&R, but has there been any view on where that £37,000 is going to come from? Is there a hope that that will be self-sustaining once the charging has put in, or are we looking at a long-term investment there? Thanks.
Councillor Last.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to see we got such a good response from residents on this, so we've got a better steer than normal. I would go along with sort of 8 to 8 for overnight parking, 8 at night to 8 in the morning. With regard to charging, my fear is that we don't overprice this because it will have an impact on leisure and tourism in the area, and the people won't come to Sheerness in the first place. And also when it comes to which vehicles, which should be all vehicles, it should be a blanket ban, not blanket charge across the lot. And I also agree with Councillor Worcester with regard to the removal of the blocks on the Shingle Bank until we get a proper coach car park area, which is obviously we've discussed and talked about before. They should stay in place because there is that danger, as she's highlighted. And my main question is, what do officers see as the reasonable time scale before this comes in?
Thank you. Councillor Miller next.
Thank you, Chair. My point was just made by Councillor Worcester. It was just to raise concerns about those mentioned who are currently using the site as a permanent light base. I'm in favour of the proposals, but just wanted to know if there are any plans for those who will in effect lose their current base. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Winkless.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement basically with bringing night charging in. I am a bit concerned that perhaps £15 is a little bit too high. Possibly perhaps looking at reducing it at £10. But my other question is to Martin, I think it was mentioned earlier on, if we bring this in, we've got to make sure that the fees are collected. So basically, to you, Martin, how will this take place as it's night time? Proposal.
Councillor Nundy.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Perkin was actually quite fortunate she spoke before me because she did actually ask a question that I was going to about the sustainability of the costs behind this, because some of it clearly is a one-off payment. You know, general repairs to the surfacing, £5,000, removal of concrete blocks, £1,500, but that figure of 22,800 additional enforcement, I know that's both over both locations, but how sustainable is that going to be moving forward? And I think the problem is we don't know how much money this would make until we introduce the charges. It's pie in the sky. It's pure speculation as to how much money would be made, although I do note that there isn't actually anything in the report about that, which it wouldn't make any difference. I think Councillor Noah's raised a very valid point about the actual practicalities of enforcing this in Laysdown. I don't really know the area very well, so I shan't comment any further, but I think that would give me cause for concern to vote on something tonight when actually we don't know how viable it is or how easy it's going to be to enforce, because if you can't enforce it, you're not going to generate the money, because if people work out that they can just stay there without paying the parking charge, then you spend all that money in enforcing, in putting something in place that you then can't enforce. I think we definitely need more information about the location in Laysdown, that the information isn't there, and that I think it would be financially irresponsible to make a blanket decision tonight on something when, look, it's clear from Sheppey residents that this does need sorting, but the right decision needs to be made, and as much as it's taken a long time, I think it's important that we actually work out the practicalities behind it. There's also nothing in the report, which I am quite surprised about how safe it actually is for people to be parked on the shingle bank overnight, because as long as I've lived on the island, which isn't as long as some people, that has been a seed offence. So is it safe? Is it safe to have people parked up there overnight all year round? I don't know the answer to that question. That hasn't been included here. But the general view of people on the island is they want to see these parking charges introduced. I think £15, as Councillor Whiting has said, is quite a reasonable amount. It is less than other areas, and it's been in magazines how good a place it is to camp. So, yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Just as an added comment to that, I had previously mentioned it, but there's a comparable site in Eastchurch called Clifftop Camping. They don't offer toilets, they don't offer anything. It's pretty much the exact same amenities that they would get on the Shingle Bank or Shell Ness. They charge £15 a night, so it's a good sort of benchmark to work with. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now bring Martin in to answer everyone's questions.
I thought this might be the case tonight, so I brought my writing skills. First one was Councillor Whiting, 1st of July deadline. So I'd refer you to paragraph 212, which says, on the best case scenario, with a fair wind, without major objections to the formal consultation, we might be able to deliver that deadline, but that is hugely caveated. I only have a delegation as an officer to consider a small number of objections. If we get to a larger number, then clearly I would need to come back to committee, and the summer holidays would be blown out of the water. So I can't sit here and say there will be signs and there will be payments from the 1st of July, but I can say, exactly what it says in the report. That's our attempt. So that's number one. Councillor Palmer put Barton's Point in the traffic order. It's entirely a possibility, and I would attach that. There was a question later on about have we liaised with the operators? At the moment, the operators are only on a interim agreement, so no is the answer to that. But certainly we're waiting on the final outcome of the ecology surveys, which is any day now, and then we will start those conversations with operators, etc. again, but mindful that clearly we will need to have that conversation before we implemented something. Councillor Worcester, maintenance by the Environment Agency. They've made it very clear that they do not see the shingle bank as their asset. Their asset that shows on their map is the concreted areas behind the green areas. And as a result, we always knew the land that the shingle bank sits on was leased land by Swale Borough Council. But I'm taking that as though the Environment Agency won't be doing any maintenance on the shingle bank as a result. Next one was Councillor Neal, how far do the restrictions go down? I didn't want to miss coming to this committee, so as a result there are some gaps in information. However, that would be the process that we would go through with Joint Transportation Board, so we will be doing that piece of work in terms of how far the restrictions need to go, but obviously that will be a well debated topic, how far it goes down. We've already had some discussions with Town Council, etc. around restrictions in that area prior to this because of the impact of the ship on shore, etc. So that will be one for JTB, but we are starting to work on that. Councillor Perkin, where's the funding come from? Very good question. Clearly we need to go to Policy and Resources with that report. We do have something called the Civil Enforcement Fund Reserve, which is the penalties that are charged through car parking and on-street parking. All of that income goes, once we've taken off our costs, goes into a reserve called the Civil Parking Enforcement Reserve. It currently does have enough within the reserve to cover the costs of this. And yeah, Councillor Nundy, the intention would be that the cost of enforcement broadly balances with the cost, with the income received. You're absolutely right. I prefer not to work in magic worlds. I have absolutely no idea whether one person will pay us £15 or 20,000 people will pay us £15 a night, and over how many nights. So I opted not to include any business planning in this report for that reason. And then I've got, sorry? I've got that. Plans for those that are displaced. Our housing team have already engaged a number of those in that area over time. Our housing service does provide that advice for anybody that is displaced. So our recommendation would be those that are impacted would be best served coming and talking to the housing department at that period. Councillor No, I do agree with you. Your letter was really comprehensive. Clearly, we can't in this forum do anything about the speeding, etc., because that will be a KCC police function. What we are hoping, as we are hoping with the shingle bank, is that charges will deter people and therefore will reduce down the environmental impacts, human waste, etc. The enforcement, I'll be honest, is one that concerns me in Laysdown, and actually the parish council quite clearly state in their letter, if we can't mitigate those things, then you would actually support a complete blockage within Shellness, and that is absolutely a way that's the only way that we could guarantee non-parking, and clearly we can enforce it through physical measures rather than the need for that ongoing. So it is absolutely a consideration by the committee. The reason that I've suggested the overnight charging is purely because of the public consultation results pointing in that direction, and so I think it is difficult. Clearly, for a fair amount of additional cost, we could take power down there, we could put lampposts in there, we could do CCTV, but we're talking considerable costs. We're talking £40,000-50,000 to get all of that into that location. Again, is that cost balanced with how much we would take in income from charging? And then the final one was Councillor Nundy. I think the reason I was quite open in the December meeting in my report, and when I started writing it, I had all of the concerns that I put in the December report in this report, and I opted to take them out and leave them as the December report. I've said all along that this is not an easy thing to enforce, and that actually the only way that we can really stop all of this is by putting blanket ban and not doing overnight charging. But I understand the representations from this committee and from residents around wanting to offer that opportunity. So can I give a cast iron guarantee that I can enforce on the parking? So in answer to Councillor No's question, we would send officers to that location and they would issue. We might have to send more officers to that location because of the lack of protection from CCTV, etc. But we would risk assess that with our operator. So they would still visit on a nightly basis, look to issue tickets, penalty charge notices, and we would probably be constantly replacing signage and various other measures to be able to do it. So it's going to be a real challenge, I have to be honest, to the committee on that in Laysdown to enforce that. I think that's it, but please tell me if I've missed anybody's.
Councillor Worcester.
Just quickly to come back on a couple of those points. So if the Environment Agency are not taking responsibility for the shingle bank, does that mean that Swale will in future go forward having to bear the cost of the replacement of the shingle that happens periodically? Because obviously the nature of the tides mean that that shingle does get worn away, especially on the Sheerness end of the shingle bank. And that is historically a cost that I thought was bared by the Environment Agency. So are they advocating responsibility for that as well? That's a big consideration, because I don't think our budget could withstand that sort of amount. It could be potentially almost £100,000 when you look at the plant that's involved, the staff that's involved, and the risk that's involved in terms of working between tides. So I think that's a big question here. I'd also just like to give a positive element as well. With the traffic restrictions, Minster Parish Council is working on their highway improvement plan. Sheerness's highway improvement plan is up and running. I think that's a big ask for Laysdown at the moment at the stage that it's at, but is a potential for that area as well. In that is another conversation where those traffic restrictions could be pushed at a local level. I understand the work with the JTB, but we've been having some really good responses via highway improvement plans. KCC appear to be listening to that at the moment, and I don't think that can be discontinued, because we've already talked about partnership work this evening, and I think we all know, if you're local to that area, that those traffic restrictions will be essential to the smooth running of parking in that area and safety, because we've just had yet another accident along Marine Parade. Luckily, no fatalities, but absolutely outside the Ship on Shore car park. So we know that the data is there, that we cannot just ignore those traffic issues and congestion issues that are being caused by displacement. Thank you.
Thank you. It's definitely a lot cheaper to do the whole lot in one run, one traffic regulation order, than to try to do it in two.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I think going back to obviously Blaisdowne and Shellness, one of the things, obviously, that big difference between the Shingle Bank and Shellness is that Shellness is a single carriageway road with the parking off to the side, and you often get a lot of people walking along there. So I think that was one of the big issues raised at Blaisdowne, was the fact that it is such a narrow road. You do have cars, and with vehicles being parked, if it can't be monitored properly, could cause lots of accidents. And it is one of the reasons why they suggested, if it can't be monitored, a blanket ban. Just wanted to give a bit more information on what the road was like along Shellness.
Thank you. Obviously, heard your concerns about up at Blaisdowne. I think Councillor Whiting's recommendation of an annual review would hopefully give us a chance to put it in for a year, and then we come back to this committee. We could throw it all up in the air and start again, or hopefully not. But we'll hopefully just improve on what we've made. Indeed. Yeah. Did anyone else? Sorry, Martin, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, otherwise I'm going to forget it because I forgot one of Councillor Perkins, so I'll come back on that as well. So you talked about the safety of displacement onto the road. There is, of course, that risk if we get a long line parked along the road there. It's interesting because the police often talk to me about, and KCC often talk to me about, cars in roads are actually a deterrent to slow people, are actually a mechanism to slow cars down as opposed to allow them to speed along along empty roads. So depends on who you talk to in terms of that safety risk, but absolutely it is a concern that it could be displaced into the road and therefore cause unforeseen issues. We talk in my team about the law of unintended consequences a lot. And what looks like an obvious fix for one problem often creates other problems. And so all of this is complicated, and I'm sure it will take, and that's why I'm more than happy with the review proposal, because we're not going to get this 100% right for first time. And then on the EA moving of Shingle, I'm told that is an activity that EA do. They have not told us that they are not going to do it, so therefore we will work on the basis that they are going to do it, but I'm sure we may have that challenge in the future. And then on the single carriageway at Shellness, I agree. You'll recall that we did a number of physical barriers along that roadway, and they've been fairly effective in those locations. So actually, if the committee were minded in future that enforcement wasn't working, the installation of similar barriers would all the way along. Clearly, that then takes away the enjoyment during the daytime for those that use those bays, and which is why I would probably support, let's try a traffic restriction first, monitor it, and then we can say that we've tried everything before physically blocking everyone out of usage.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I wondered, a little question to Martin. Is it the case that parking for visitors is at £1.10 a night from 5 till 10 on sort of Sheppey as a visitor ticket? I thought just in line with charging, if we're charging about £10 per night, when we're sort of in line with that. Obviously it's a different area, but just makes it seem fair in my mind if that was the case, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I would argue it's a different type of product. Generally, people within the car parks that are being charged that hourly rate are in, out quite quickly, whereas obviously an overnight stay does require that, we would have to enforce throughout the evening, so that we can't be seen to be, they always come at 10 o'clock, so we'll come after 10 o'clock, etc. So we will enforce throughout through the night. So there are additional costs, and so I would certainly recommend, given the numbers in front of you, that you consider the cost of night being a rate that is not too far that it prices you out of anybody paying, but is enough to at least make a dent in those ongoing enforcement costs.
Okay. So I think we're getting to time to take the recommendations. Obviously, we need to fill in some of the blanks. 1 and 2 are quite simple. Number 3, I'm feeling like that members want £15 a night charge. Councillor Moore.
I was just going to say I'll propose 8 sort of times, 8 till 8 at £15 if it makes it easier.
Did you also have an opinion on what type of vehicles? Was it cars?
I think it's been it's sort of all vehicles, yeah, except no, like with the no caravans, like what's been said.
So ban on caravans. So that answers 4, 5, and 3. And number 6, we're referring the request on. 7, we're noting the petition. You mentioned banning caravans, and did you mention annual review?
With an annual review.
Excellent. I think that covers all my papers then. Yes, that seems to be what Councillor Whiting opened with. So thank you for the direction. Is there a seconder? Oh, I won't fight. Councillor No. Right, so the committee are asked to approve overnight charges at the Shingle Bank and the Grass Opposite and Shelness Road. We refer the additional costs stated at 2.20 to the Policy and Resources Committee for approval for the first year of operation. We've agreed a charge of £15 per night, and that's going to be referred to Policy and Resources and full council. We've agreed a time of 8 till 8 p.m. till 8 a.m, just to be clear. We've decided what type of vehicles, a ban on caravans and a charge to all others. We're referring it to JTB, our request, not requirement. We note the opposition petition, and we agree an annual review. I don't know if we'll just push that into one of them, Billy, yes? Yes, yes, yes. Excellent. All those in favour of those 7.5 recommendations, please show. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. So that vote is carried, 14 for, no one against, and 1 abstention. So we move on to the next item that Jay's been waiting patiently for, which is the Swale Leisure Contract, Faversham Pools. Over to you, Jay.
The report details the recent discussions with the members' working group and Faversham Pools Trust regarding Faversham Pool Trust potential involvement into the Swale Leisure Contract from April 27. The report confirms the decision of the Faversham Pools Trust Board to be considered for the Swale Leisure Contract. The committee are asked to discuss the implications, both positive and negative, of including Faversham Pools in the contract and make a decision ahead of the tender. There are 2 recommendations this evening. Recommendation 1 has 2 options. Option A is to include Faversham Pools in the upcoming leisure contract, and option B is to not include Faversham Pools. The second recommendation is that officers and are delegated to continue to work with the members' working group and Faversham Pools Trust, if appropriate, in finalising the tender specification, documentation, legal framework, and proceed to tender. Members have previously reviewed the financial variances between insourcing compared with outsourcing and the financial modelling of 2 facilities compared with 3. There is currently no additional budget provision for the inclusion of Faversham Pools over and above the £80,000 set aside for their annual grant within the medium-term financial plan. As the recommendation is to go to market in order to protect the Council's commercial sensitivity, details of this can be found in the exempt Appendix 1, and the potential additional costs/savings for SPC can be found at Appendix 2. If you wish to talk about the figures on either appendix, we will need to enter into a closed session. Thank you.
So as heard, we do have a excluded item. If do members think we're going to be discussing items on that? Or are we happy to stay in open session and skirt around it? Councillor Nundy.
I don't really quite follow either appendix, so I'd like to enter into closed session purely and simply so that I can understand the actual what the finances are on it. I'm happy to then go back into open session once that's been clarified, because I understand obviously Faversham residents that might be watching the meeting are going to want to hear, you know, their representatives talking about what they think and other council members on that. But I would prefer to enter closed session for a brief period just to get my head around it a little bit.
Okay, Councillor Winkless.
Well, yes, I'll echo the previous speaker, as it's a sort of delegate, basically information. I think perhaps we should go to closed session.
Okay then, so we'll be entering closed session. I'll read out the legal gumph. So for members in the gallery, if you obviously leave the room, once we've discussed the blue paper, we'll invite you back in for the rest of the item. So, by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1... To move into closed session? Yeah. No. By virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, this item is exempt from public session, and therefore we shall move into closed session. All those in favour of that, please show. That is unanimous, thank you. Welcome back, those watching online. So item 8, and that is Swale Leisure Contract Faversham Pools. And the first person I have up to speak is Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to speak in favour of including Faversham Pools in the upcoming leisure contract tender for a number of reasons, really. One is that it is super important to secure the future of Faversham Pools. It's about more than money. It's about securing that access to kind of life-saving skills for our young people and for adults as well. Adults learn to swim there as well. It's not just children. It's about providing accessibility for people with disabilities. Swimming is a really important accessible activity for people who have physical mobility issues. My mum, who is a multiple sclerosis sufferer, for a long time before she was completely wheelchair bound, swimming was the only kind of activity that she was able to do, because that kind of provides that weightless experience, but also it was a way that she was able to interact with her grandchildren in a way that she isn't able to do when she's out of the water. So it was a really super important element in my life. My children are currently learning to swim at Faversham Pools. A couple of years ago, we worked with the Faversham Disability Forum to look at improving even further the accessibility to swimming for people with disabilities, and as part of that work there was some really great improvement work done on the surfacing outside of the outdoor pools. I think being included in the long-term tender provides opportunity for people outside Faversham to be able to experience the facilities as well. It's one of the most visited tourist attractions in the whole of Swale. It's a super important part of our community, and there's a real love for it. It feels like part of the fabric of Faversham. Lots of people remember when there was just the outdoor pool, and then, you know, all of the money that was raised to improve the facilities. It really feels like part and parcel of our community. So I would really encourage the committee to recommend including it in the future contract. There's a couple of points in the paper that I wanted to speak to. On page 67, it says car parking refund costs are not currently provided at Faversham as it operates under a separate lease arrangement. I would be really keen to see something come into line so that it's reflected across all of the patch, so that there is fairness around parking for all people who are trying to access leisure activities. But I would also really encourage the council and possibly the working group to speak to the town council about that and about any kind of potential displacement with regards to summer parking, especially with the markets, just to make sure that we are not causing any undue issues with the decision that we make. I think that the town council understand very well the kind of issues that occur in the town centre. So I would really encourage the committee to speak to them about that before making that decision. Also wanted to just highlight in the equality and diversity section of the report, as I've just spoken to around disability, the fact that the tender process says that it will follow a standard Sport England recommended process which ensures equality of access opportunity. It's the heart of the decision as part of the equalities impact assessment. But I just wanted to really kind of labour the point that if Faversham Pools was to close, it not only impacts everyone in the community, but it significantly impacts those people that aren't able to access other forms of physical activity. So I think it's really important that we reflect that when we are making our decisions. But yeah, fully support the report. Thank you for bringing it to the committee, and please do vote to support having the pools included in the contracts moving forward. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Relatively little to add, but just to perhaps do the hard sell to those residents who are not regular swimmers at Faversham Pool. Firstly, the evening autumn swims in the and the outside pool, even though it is heated, There are far too few of us mad enough to swim outside in the winter, and I would welcome all of your company should you wish to join me on Tuesdays and Thursdays or Sunday morning, when I frequently am on my own, which is delightful. But more people would be very, very welcome. And I think that is the real benefit of us taking this approach. You know, the Faversham Pools is a truly fantastic facility for families, for lunatics who wish to throw themselves into cold water in the winter, for divers, and for everybody learning to swim and those with accessibility issues as well. It is a really fantastic facility, and we are already delighted to share it with the rest of the borough and people who come and pay on a one-off basis, but actually having a membership system for the whole borough would make that offer more widely accessible to everybody across the borough, and offer opportunities for our residents in Faversham who might regularly swim in Faversham but occasionally come out to the island or swim here or go to the gym here in Sittingbourne, all of which would be very, very positive. So I'm keen that we support this. I know the trustees of Faversham Pools have thought long and hard about considering this option. They have done some really, really detailed work and are continuing to work very closely with officers. So I think I'd like to thank them on behalf of all the residents of Faversham for the enormous amount of work they do and are continuing to do. And I know our pool is in very safe hands with them, and hopefully will continue to be should we go forward with this. So I'd ask us all to vote for it this evening. Thank you.
I can't say the outdoor pool was that warm last summer when I attended, so I dread to think what it's like at this time of year. Councillor Worcester.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to drill down a little bit because into what the proposal is, because I'm absolutely in favour of making sure that Faversham retains its pool. I think it's fundamental to communities to be able to offer that sort of facility when residents are not going to have a pool in their back garden. You know, that's a fundamental, brilliant way for families to enjoy their local amenities. However, I'm also very keen in making sure that Faversham Pool do not fall into the same traps as Sheerness. Over the last 2 years, there's been fundamental issues with the governance model of Sheerness Pool in terms of, as a ward councillor, being made aware of absolutely fundamental operational changes that I'm fully aware that this committee...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I think that's probably something best taken offline. We need, the item is Faversham Pools. I think we need to focus in.
But I would like to know then, short question, are we actually going to be retaining that quality local voice that Faversham obviously has in its pool, and have we got reassurance around that?
Who wants that one? Martin? Jay?
Thank you. The short answer is yes, in a sense that there will be an opportunity as part of the tender process for, prior to the tender process, the Faversham Pools representatives are actively involved and will be continued, subject to tonight's decision, will continue to be involved in putting the specification together, the tender documents, and ensuring that Faversham's objectives and outcomes are acknowledged within the tender documents. So the new potential operator will be fully aware as part of their tender submission what the requirements for each of the facilities will be. Once the contract has been awarded, then there will be a requirement to have regular updates and regular contact with a range of stakeholders at all three sites. And focusing in on Faversham specifically, then still to be confirmed what the model looks like, whether it's a friends group or something very, very similar, but there will be regular contact with the operator as well as ourselves and the friends group on going forward. So there should be and will be that regular conduit of communication both ways.
I think that's most welcome. I think it does feel like Serco, sort of almost a million miles away. But so I'd definitely, on governance, whether we set up an ongoing working group or we could have sort of an annual meet with Serco, or not Serco, whoever gets the tender, it's Serco now. Well, it's not. Very complicated. Councillor Worcester, please come back and save me.
So I sit on trustee boards elsewhere, and I think a vote of thanks needs to go to those trustees that have worked now and previously on Faversham Pools. And actually, this is the opportunity to say, yes, there may be a change in the model, but let's take the best of it and use it as a model that potentially could work on other sites, and be open to change and really be reflective of that local community voice, rather than it just being a tick box exercise. It could be so much more than that, and now our staff want it to be so much more than that, and hopefully as a committee we will support that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Jay said, we're very much aware of that, how the GP and the NHS have these patient groups, etc., and that's what we're envisaging for this type of friends group approach. You've got to remember that the last time we let this contract was in 2004. The world was a very different place, and so it's absolutely right that governance models are changing. We are following a Sport England template and process that's been well honed with lots of operators, lots of trusts, lots of local authorities over the last few years, and so I can absolutely give the committee the assurance that we are updating those requirements to have that engagement with both the community and their users, if they are two separate elements.
Councillor Nundy.
Well, I'm a very big believer in democracy, and the people of Faversham have elected councillors here who think it's a good idea. There appears to be no negative to doing so, so I'm all in favour of it. Let's make Faversham pools great again.
Greater.
Never say that again.
If there's no further discussion, I'm looking for a councillor to propose a second and pick between option A and B. Councillor Perkin, what is your proposal? Okay, so we're going to go with 1A and 2, all in one go. Got proposer. Councillor Gibson seconded. We've done our discussion. All those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you all for coming, and we'll do the forward plan.
We're going to go summer.
Okay, on the forward plan, the date of meeting, we've gone with summer, so it'll be some point in the summer, preferably not the whole 90 days of the summer, but just one of them. Councillor Last.
I think people know what I'm going to say. Can we have a more advanced forward plan with it broken down so that we got some idea of what's coming up? Also for officers as well, not just for us.
Yep, I noted on the health committee they were looking at scrutiny reports. I think that's a good idea across all committees. However, I'm struggling to think what we'd scrutinise. We're doing the leisure contract. We've recently done the parking contract. We've had a report on play areas. If anyone has any ideas what they'd like to scrutinise, I've got other ideas for other committees, but not my own.
We've sort of done it, but not said it's a scrutiny.
Yeah. If there's no further discussion, I'll close the meeting again. Thank you all for coming, and good night.